An architecturally significant former Chicago public school building on the south side is getting a new assignment. We'll talk to the man who's making that happen. I'm Lee Bay, and welcome to Architecture 360. We're talking about Overton School, a really clever and colorful mid-century modern building at 49th and Prairie. You might remember it was one of 50 Chicago public schools closed in 2013. Now, after the closing, there was some concern over the fate of Overton, a real gem built in 1963 and designed by architecture firm Perkins and Will. Some feared it could be demolished. But the Washington Park Development Group recently got the green light to purchase the building. Guion Foreman, a partner in that group, is with us today to talk about his plans. Guion, welcome to Architecture 360.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, let's jump right on in. Talk about the building first. You were attracted to the design of this building.
Yeah. So first of all, I've known about the building my whole life, having grown up in the area. And when I heard that this was one of the buildings that was being closed, it was of interest to me immediately. Number one, my aunt was a teacher there. So I remember as a kid, going over with her and meeting her students and that kind of thing. But it just struck me how beautiful the building was. There's a kind of a sister building, so to speak, on 47th and State Street.
Beethoven School.
Beethoven School, that's right, that I drive by every day. So I said, man, what a beautiful building. And when Chicago Public Schools put it out for bid, I literally drove by the school every day for a month and just could not come up with an idea of what to do with it. I mean, what do you do with it? It's all glass and, I'm not really sure what to do.
And talk about that a bit. I mean, many people may see schools, they think of a public school, they think of the old school ones from the 20s and 30s, or if they think of a modern one, it's like not one as well designed, but this one is really something else.
Yeah, so in my research now, I've kind of learned about it, right? So back then in the 1960s, very similar to the 1910 versions of schools that you see, Chicago Public Schools was pretty wise in terms of what they want to do. They say, hey, come up with a prototype that we can build over and over and over again, but affordable. Right. And so Perkins and Will came up with this very unique design for that stage in time. It looks like something we designed today. Right, with all glass and everything. This is the kind of thing that you see people building their homes in Lincoln Park and that kind of thing. They use unique materials, and it's a very striking building. So the building is structured like this. Imagine 3 pods, so to speak, a square to the east, a rectangle in the center, and then a square to the right, all connected by glass bridges that connect all 3 of these buildings together. And then going south, another glass bridge connected it to the gymnasium. And it's one of these, you remember when you were in grade school, it's a gymatorium.
Right.
It's a gym, but it's a stage where you can have assemblies and plays and that kind of thing.
That's right.
So it's 42 rooms in total. That 42 rooms includes the principal's office, the cafeteria, the preschool classrooms, but it's 42 plus the gym. So we looked at it and just kind of said, man, I'm not really sure what to do. And I walked through with an architect and he said, yeah, it's interesting. When we were doing things first in the West Loop, we had to kind of think through the same things. But in that case, it was big industrial buildings. What can you do that would be that would keep the significance of the building, not change the structure of the building so much, but make it good for use of today? And it hit me. A live work office, right? My partner and I, when we were first starting our company, our office was my kitchen table or his kitchen table, right? And so we thought that would be a good opportunity to find a lot of entrepreneurs in the neighborhood, but really not a lot of places to go. And so now if you talk about this, we're trying to figure out all the new things to get LEED certified. Well, this building was built with all glass. You could almost not even turn on the lights and have enough light that you wouldn't have to turn on the lights. Now, you won't get any LEED points for that, but how do we use energy today, right? And so these are the kind of things that we thought through and just said, this could be a real anchor for this community, for this next generation of the community, right? Since 1960s, this was a real asset in the community. It was something that parents came to parent-teacher conferences, bake sales. You walked by to and from school. You played in a playground area. Probably played Strikeout on the wall. I don't know if you guys remember Strikeout.
I remember that.
Yeah. So how do you make this thing still an asset, right? So that's what we thought. Wow, what if this was like an entrepreneurial center? There are a lot of businesses in our communities that need to be housed someplace, right? If you have this accountant in the building and you have that marketing company in the building, and you have the famous Lee Bay taking pictures in the building, right? Now, how can those companies work together to make a sustainable community, right? And you still have the gym where you can invite people. Where do people in the community go to Boy Scouts? Now the building, in the current use, it becomes an opportunity to continue to bring people into the building, to have people working together who might not ever even know each other, right? But that marketing company is in the building with the accountant, with the photographer, and now they get to know each other, and the building itself becomes an ecosystem. Of course, architecturally, which is why we're here. This is the Architecture 360 show. Architecturally, it's a gym. And we don't want to lose that history. So, like, for us, we're going to go after historic tax credits and maintain it as a historic building. And what that means is there's a lot of things we cannot do.
Right, right.
So as a typical developer, I would come in and say, oh, well, let me tear down the gym and I can build townhouses here and I can maximize my profit. By doing this, going after the historic tax credits, what it does is it provides us, the developer, some financial incentives to keep it historic, to maintain the building the way that it is, right? And we think that it's worth giving up some potential profit to maintain this history.
And we'll talk about some of the development pressures that are in Washington Park that might make it tempting to put the townhouses there. In just a minute, I want to get to the idea of these schools as assets. I mean, they often have things in them that neighborhoods don't have. The gym, as you mentioned, they have like library space. I mean, kitchens, things that if they're bulldozed, they're just lost.
That's correct. Let's take what's here. Let's take the cafeteria. And can you make a shared kitchen? So the lady who makes cakes out of her home right now, can she reserve some space to make cakes or cookies in here now? Or can the guy who makes gumbo, can he use this space now and he can potentially get a contract with the local grocery store or something like that, right? The gym. How can you use that? Just like we're here recording now. What if you use the stage to create content that could be streamed on the web? People could see, hey, live from Bronzeville. You could have plays, or you could have shows. For the Bud Billiken parade, maybe young groups could come and practice there to get ready for Bud Billiken. I think that as a developer, I don't feel that I have all the answers. I think that answer is within the community.
Speaking of the community, Washington Park is an interesting time right now. I mean, here's a community built for 50,000, lots of disinvestment in the last century, but now it's on the come up again. Talk about what's happening there and those forces and what you see.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the elephant in the room is the potential for the Obama Library to come into Washington Park, and obviously that would bring about a ton of changes.
Many of our listeners are nationals, so there's Washington Park is a community. Then there's a very historic park called Washington Park, which is on the eastern edge of the community, designed by Olmsted. And one of the sites for the Presidential Library is the western edge of this park, sort of in the edge, but yet also in the heart of the community as well.
This neighborhood is not new to this kind of speculation before. We don't know. The library could potentially go in Washington Park, or it could go in Jackson Park. And so we've had this kind of speculation before.
With the Olympics.
With the 2016 Olympic bid that Chicago was going after.
Right.
Our perspective, our being Washington Park Development Group, is that this is a great place to live, to work, regardless of whether or not we get the Obama Library. So we started investing in the Washington Park neighborhood over 10 years ago, kind of feeling like where else this close to the Central Business District, 5 miles south of the Central Business District, a mile west of the University of Chicago, a mile and a half, 2 miles south of Illinois Institute of Technology. You have great public transportation, Red Line, Green Line. You have Midway Airport. You have great museums, Museum of Science and Industry, all the museums on the campus, the DuSable Museum of African American History. Where else can you find this much vacant land? It's like going into one of these suburban areas where it was once a cornfield and you decide to put up homes. Let's come up with the 2016, 2017 version of what this community can look like. We think that one of those anchors will be the Overton School.
As we talk about the school and how you put the deal together, you have an idea about funding, something that the state could do.
Chicago, great city, a lot of history here. But on the south side, on the west side, we have a lot of great historical treasures. However, These areas, these neighborhoods have been underdeveloped, underserved, underinvested for a long time. And so, for example, I'm going after historic tax credits on a couple of projects in the neighborhood, but that's a federal tax credit. Mm-hmm. If there were a state tax credit, and right now there is a pilot program in a couple of cities in Illinois, but if there were a state program, that would spur more investment, more development in these neighborhoods. And all the neighboring states have this state tax credit. It's kind of a sister tax credit to the federal tax credit. And it shows that this doesn't waste money, right? It creates jobs. It helps to spur an investment. And so there are a lot of buildings out here that people walk by every day and say, if there were funding for it, then there's something I could do. That tax credit could be a great tool for developers to use. And I think it would be a boost for the city and for the state.
This is a good point, because if I know this tax correctly, some river towns in Illinois have these.
That's
right.
Able
to, just in the past few years, enjoy some bounce from that.
And it's been huge for those towns. And so I look at those towns no different from how I look at a Washington Park, right, or an Inglewood. Mm-hmm. We need the same kind of investment that those towns did. Those towns used to be booming towns, a lot of jobs in those towns. And then when industry went away, the same thing happened. There was disinvestment. Well, our neighborhoods were the exact same way. There used to be, it used to be a school. It used to be a bakery building. It used to be a bank, and those things went away. So how do you repopulate this thing and make it work, but make sure you save that history?
And as you do that, is there concern? You know, I did some time in Washington Park, working with the University of Chicago a little while ago, and one of the things that you hear there is there's the fear of gentrification, and a gentrification that pushes people out or prices people out of their homes, taxes people out of their homes. It's not sustainable for a neighborhood to exist the way Washington Park has been allowed, and maybe some case forced to exist by outside forces in the last century. Now there's a bounce, but how do you control that bounce, or do you control that bounce? What do you do with that bounce, I guess?
Yeah. Everybody has their own opinion. My opinion is this. I think that some gentrification is bound to happen. And I think that in some cases, it's a good thing. I think that the answer is you have to find ways that the different groups can learn to coexist. Mm-hmm. What good would it do me to buy Miss Lee's restaurant, tear it down, and build something new? Now I don't have Miss Lee's in the neighborhood anymore. Yeah. Miss Lee's is the best soul food in the city. Sure so is. You got to find a way to make these things coexist.
You've got another landmark building in Washington Park you got good things planned for, which is the Schultz Bakery at 55th and State. Many of you listeners may know this bakery. It's, first of all, if you're of a certain age, when you drove down Garfield Boulevard, you smelled the baking bread. So that's how you knew you were either home or leaving home. That's right. One or the other. But also, it's a grand building, tall building, terracotta clad, sort of like a cathedral for bread, I think. But talk about this building, what it looks like, what it is, and where it's going.
Yeah, so the building was built in 1913, completed in 1914. Paul Schultz was kind of seen as the father of modern baking. Before this, bakeries were small mom and pop bakeries, right? Small place, or housewives indeed still made bread at home. And Schultz decided that he was going to make this big factory. But factories back then, there was no EPA or anything like that, tall and brown brick and smokestacks, billowing out smoke. And he decided that he was going to make this place. The building itself was almost the marketing tool itself. It's all white with Italian terracotta, blue lettering. And he wanted this to make it a place of cleanliness. When you looked at this, you thought of cleanliness. And his whole thing was, my building is cleaner than your kitchen. So when people came and did tours, he passed out white carnations and white gloves to give you this feeling like, wow. The building itself is about 230,000 square feet, and it was what was known as a vertical bakery. So on the 5th floor, they mixed up the dough. On the 4th floor, the bread was allowed to rise on the 4th floor. The ovens were on the 3rd floor. Packing was on the 2nd floor where, they sliced it and packaged it. 1st floor was shipping. And this was the highest producing bakery in the country for 50 years. And then it just became obsolete because vertical no longer was the most efficient thing to do.
And you bought the building. So the bread company goes out of business in 2004, as I recall. And you buy the building originally to make it a data center.
No, originally I bought it to do it as a mixed use building.
Ah, okay. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so originally I bought it to do commercial on the ground floor and residential upstairs. And this was December 2006. So 2007 is when the whole financial collapse started to happen. And we couldn't get financing. And so at that point, I would look for any option. And so we looked at data centers, but again, there was no financing for it. We went back to residential. There was no financing for it. Went back to data centers. I was willing to do anything. I told my wife at one point, we're going to have a 230,000 square foot house. So in 1913, it was perfect for a bakery. In 2016, it's perfect for a data center. There are a lot of similarities to how these buildings operate.
And you've been able to get together a deal with outfit out of New Jersey, I guess, just in the past month, let's say.
Yeah, a group called 1547 Critical Data Systems. What I found was that I ran into a chicken and an egg problem. I have the building, I own the building, and I have a great idea to develop the building, but I've never developed a data center before. So tenants would come and look and say, wow, this would be a great data center, but you've never built a data center before. And I'll say, well, if you sign a lease, I can go get the financing. And they would say, well, you build it and then I'll sign a lease. And so I just couldn't do it on my own. So this group, they've built several data centers around the country before. Their leadership team has built hundreds of data centers around the country. We've started a little bit of construction now. We're going through the process now with our architects working on all the historic features, right? So that's where the devil's in the details in terms of how do you replace this terracotta and do that. But it's going to be an incredible project.
And timeline-wise, when do you think it'll be up and running, or the phases begin to sort of line up?
Well, it depends on when we get some of those leases.
Right.
Realistically, I think that mid-2018 is when we'll see the first phase of it open.
That's good. And Overton, what's the timeline on that thereabout?
Overton, we probably will close November 1st we probably can get that project done in a year.
Excellent. Well, Guion, thank you for joining us and giving us a sense of what you're doing there.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. This is a great opportunity, and I'm glad that you're out here promoting this. We need this in the city.
Well, we'll have you back. As the projects roll on, we'll definitely have you back.
Thank you, Lee.
And I'm Lee Bay. Thank you for listening to Architecture 360. Check me out on Facebook at Lee Bay Chicago and follow me on Twitter under my name. Join me next time.